Okay, so let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're gonna be talking about something pretty interesting. How do you actually build a team around someone like LeBron James? Like, how do you build a championship team? And we have some pretty cool stuff to go over today. We got some thoughts from Stephen A. Smith. He was talking about some things that Marcus Morris said, and then there's also some analysis from J.J. Redick. On the Lakers and what they were, missing before they, hypothetically added someone like Luka Doncic. And just to be clear right up front, that didn't actually happen. This is hypothetical. But yeah, we're basically going to be diving into these different ideas about, how players actually fit together and, really trying to understand the different ways that you can build a championship team in the NBA.
Yeah, it's like trying to put together one of those really complex puzzles, but instead of just shapes, you have all these different skill sets and personalities.
Hmm.
And what we're going to be doing is looking at these different perspectives, these different approaches, even if, some of them are hypothetical. But yeah, I think what we're going to find is that, putting together a great team, it isn't just about raw talent, right? It's about, how these pieces actually fit together. Like, how do those skills interact, and work together?
Yeah, yeah. You can't just throw a bunch of all-stars on the court and expect magic, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's got to be some sort of chemistry there, some kind of synergy that makes the whole greater than the sum of its parts.
Right, exactly. So let's start with Marcus Morris's take, right? As Stephen A. laid it out, Morris said something pretty bold. He said that Anthony Davis was, and I'm going to quote here, in LeBron's way, which, at first glance might sound like a pretty harsh thing to say about someone like Anthony Davis. But Morris had some pretty specific reasons for saying that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, AD is an incredible talent. You don't get to be, one of the top players in the league without having some serious skills.
Right, right. Absolutely. So Morris was arguing that LeBron, over the course of his career has kind of evolved into more of a power forward. He said LeBron's really a four now. And of course, that's the same position that Anthony Davis prefers to play.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense. That positional overlap, that's definitely something to consider. If you have two players who are both dominant in those similar areas of the court, especially around the basket, it can sometimes lead to congestion, right? Like it's just too many bodies in the same
Yeah,
space.
too many cooks in the kitchen, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And it kind of limits what you can do on offense. I mean, it's not just about them occupying the same physical space on the court. It's also about how their, particular skill sets mesh when they're both, operating in those areas.
Oh, absolutely. And Morris also pointed out that, Davis wasn't really stretching the three that well. And, that's kind of essential in today's NBA, right? That outside shooting from your big man, I mean, that can completely change the game, it seems, the spacing.
Oh yeah, I mean think about it. If your power forward or your center isn't a threat from 3-point range, the defender can just camp out in the paint. They don't have to respect that outside shot. And what does that do? It clogs up the driving lanes, makes it so much harder for players like LeBron to get to the basket. So what Morris is really saying is that it's not enough for a big man to just take the occasional three, every once in a while. What you really need is someone who can shoot consistently enough that the defense has to pay attention to them out on the perimeter.
It's about that constant threat.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. That's what creates space for everyone else. It opens up those driving lanes, it opens up those post-up opportunities, those cuts to the basket.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Having someone who can really stretch the floor like that just makes such a difference. Okay, so now this is where things get really interesting. Morris then contrasts this with the idea of adding another guard to the mix, right?
Yeah.
And not just any guard. He's talking about a top five guard in the NBA, someone he describes as a matchup nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And even though he doesn't specifically name Luka Doncic, in this part of the conversation,
Yeah.
it's pretty clear from the context that's who he has in mind.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty clear he's picturing someone with that kind of skill set. And what he's suggesting is a pretty big shift, right? Instead of having two dominant players like LeBron and AD, who are both mainly operating inside, close to the basket, he's imagining a scenario where LeBron is paired with a super dynamic guard who can just, break down defenses and create scoring chances for himself and everyone else. It's about adding another dimension to the offense. More variety, more ways to attack.
And the picture that Morris paints is pretty compelling. He says that teams, like OKC, Minnesota, Phoenix, the Clippers, they would all dread seeing him, this hypothetical top 5 guard. And then he adds, and now he got 2 threes on his back right with him, talking about LeBron.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty scary thought for any opponent. Like, imagine trying to guard that. I mean, you've got this elite guard who can score at will and also dish out assists like crazy, right?
Right.
So he's already a nightmare to deal with. But then on top of that, you've got LeBron James, who's still, one of the most dominant players in the league, and he's also a threat to score from anywhere. And now you're telling me that LeBron's also got open shots. Like, how do you even begin to defend that?
It just creates so many problems for the other team, right?
Yeah.
Like, who do you focus on? Do you double team the guard and leave LeBron open? Or do you try to contain LeBron and give the guard more space to operate? It's a constant dilemma.
Exactly, exactly. And that's what makes it so effective. That kind of pressure, that kind of uncertainty, it can completely disrupt the other team's defense. And when that happens, it opens up opportunities for everyone on the court.
Yeah, it's like a ripple effect, right? That pressure just spreads throughout the defense. So Stephen A. Smith, when he was talking about all this, he totally agreed with Morris's assessment that Davis was essentially, and I'm quoting again, actually in LeBron's way, from a positional standpoint. And he also took a minute to give some love to Marcus Morris and his brother, Markieff. He pointed out that they both had, long and successful careers in the NBA.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely showed them some respect. He acknowledged their consistency, their contributions to all the different teams they've played for.
Right, right. And, it kind of adds weight to Morris's opinion, don't you think? Like, it suggests that this isn't just some random hot take. It's a perspective that's shared by people who really know the game, people who've been around the league for a long time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if someone like Stephen A., someone who's as plugged in as he is, who's always got his finger on the pulse of the NBA, if he's buying into this idea, then there's definitely something to it.
Right, exactly. Okay, so then Smith brings in another key piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
And that's J.J. Redick's perspective.
Yeah.
So he talks about these comments that Redick made about 2 weeks before this hypothetical Luka Doncic trade. And again, just to be crystal clear, that trade never actually happened. But Smith uses Redick's comments to highlight what the Lakers were missing at that point in time.
Yeah, and I think Redick's analysis is really important here because it gets at the heart of what the Lakers were struggling with. They had talent, obviously, but they were missing something. And Redick's comments help us to understand what that missing piece might have been.
Right. So it was January 19th, and the Lakers had just lost to the Clippers. And Redick, he just comes right out and says, we don't have a guy on our team that's going to necessarily always draw a 2 to the ball. And then he adds, we don't have a guy on our team that's going to be able to get past his guy one-on-one and get to the paint and spread it out to the perimeter.
And when you put those two statements together, it paints a pretty clear picture, right? Like, what's he saying?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like they didn't have that go-to guy, someone who could consistently create their own shot, someone who could force the defense to collapse on them, and then create open looks for their teammates.
Yeah, and in today's NBA, that's so valuable. You need that guy who can break down the defense, who can penetrate and either finish at the rim or kick it out for an open 3.
Right, exactly. And that's the kind of player that Redick is arguing they were lacking. Okay, so Smith then ties this into Redick's vision for the Lakers. Which apparently came about during his podcast with LeBron. And Redick's goal was to turn the Lakers into a high three-point volume shooting team.
That's a pretty big shift in philosophy, right? Like moving away from that more traditional style of offense where you're relying on post-ups and mid-range jumpers, and instead you're really embracing the three-point shot.
Right. It's all about spacing and ball movement and taking advantage of the most efficient shot in basketball.
Totally, yeah. I mean, if you can get good looks from 3, you can really put a lot of points on the board. And the thing is, if you have a guy who can consistently draw those double teams, who can collapse the defense, it creates so many opportunities for open 3s.
Yeah, and the numbers that Smith gives are pretty crazy. So before this hypothetical player came in, the Lakers were averaging just 33.8 three-point attempts per game, which was like 27th in the league. But then, after the addition of this hypothetical player, their average jumped up to 41.7 attempts per game, 6th in the league.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, it's a complete transformation of their offensive identity. From a team that was reluctant to shoot threes, they turned into a team that was launching them from everywhere.
Yeah, and that just goes to show the impact that a player like Doncic could have, right? I mean, he's that good at creating open looks for his teammates.
Right. And that's why Smith thinks that Redick would have been all in on this trade, because Redick, he just comes right out and says, we don't have a guy on our team that's going to be able to get past his guy one-on-one and get to the paint and spread it out to the perimeter.
Yeah,
He says that Redick would have been telling the Lakers, do everything you can to get that damn deal done.
It makes sense, right? I mean, if you're trying to build a team that can win a championship and you have a chance to add a player like Doncic, a player who can completely change the game with his passing and his scoring, you do whatever it takes to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a player like that can really elevate everyone around him.
Hmm.
And that's what Redick was seeing. He was seeing the potential for the Lakers to become something truly special.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, creating open shots for LeBron. It's also about giving LeBron more space to work with. When he's not the primary focus of the defense, he can really use his strength and his athleticism to overpower
So
opponents.
it calls it bully ball.
Yeah. Yeah, bully ball. And when LeBron's got that space, he can just bulldoze his way to the basket. Or he can pull up for a three.
And Smith even says that, in this hypothetical scenario, LeBron was getting more uncontested three-pointers than ever before in his Lakers career.
Yeah, it all just comes back to that spacing, right? When you have a player like Doncic who can draw the defense, it creates opportunities for everyone else.
Right. Now, it's really important to acknowledge the nuance here. The Lakers did win a championship with LeBron and Anthony Davis.
Mhm.
And Smith made sure to point that out. He reminds everyone that, 5 years ago, everyone thought that LeBron and AD were a perfect fit. And they were incredibly successful together. And Smith even says that he thinks AD might be feeling a little bit slighted by all this talk.
Yeah, that's understandable, right? I mean, AD is a phenomenal player. He's been an all-star, he's won a championship, he's been one of the best players in the league. So it's not about saying that he's not good or that he's not a valuable player. It's more about, how his skill set fits with LeBron's in the context of the current Lakers team. And also, how the NBA has changed in the past few years.
Yeah. Yeah. And Smith makes a point of highlighting AD's accomplishments. He talks about his all-world talent and the fact that he's consistently putting up 28 points and 12 rebounds a game. I mean, those are monster numbers. Yeah, those are all NBA numbers. He's a force. But the question that Smith is asking is, does AD's game complement LeBron's game as well as it could? Or would someone like Doncic, someone with a different set of skills, would they actually create a more effective dynamic?
And that's really the heart of this whole discussion, right? Was Anthony Davis really in LeBron's way, like Morris said? Or is it more inaccurate to say that Doncic just creates a different and potentially better fit? And Smith even brings up the plus-minus numbers, which supposedly show that the Lakers were better with LeBron and this hypothetical Doncic on the court together than they were with LeBron and AD. Yeah, that's an interesting data point, right? I mean, plus minus, it's not a perfect stat, but it does give you some insight into how effective different lineups are. And if the Lakers were outscoring their opponents by a larger margin when LeBron and Doncic were on the court together, that suggests that there was something special about that pairing.
Right. So then the conversation kind of shifts to trying to understand what Morris really meant when he said that AD was in LeBron's way. Like, was he saying that AD was actually hurting the team? Or was he just saying that he wasn't as helpful as someone like Doncic could be?
Yeah, that's a really important distinction
Mhm.
because, the phrase in someone's way can definitely sound negative, right? It implies that the player is a liability, that they're holding the team back, but not as beneficial is a much more neutral way of putting it. It acknowledges that both players are talented, but it suggests that one player might be a better fit for the team's current needs.
Right. And in the end, the consensus seems to be, or at least the conclusion that Smith arrives at, is that the Lakers in this hypothetical scenario were better with Doncic than they were with AD.
Yeah, and I think it all comes back to the fact that Doncic is just such a unique player. He's a gifted scorer, but he's also an elite passer. He can create shots for himself and for his teammates. And when you pair that with LeBron's all-around brilliance, it creates a really potent offensive force.
Right. I mean, it's hard to argue with the idea that having two players who can dominate the ball, who can break down defenses, and who can make everyone around them better, that's a recipe for success in the NBA. So to sum all this up, this deep dive into these different perspectives has really highlighted the complexities of building a championship team. We've seen how Morris's assessment of Anthony Davis and Redick's observations about the Lakers' needs and Smith's analysis, all of these different viewpoints, they all kind of point to the same conclusion, which is that a ball-dominant playmaking guard, someone like Doncic, could potentially create a more dynamic and explosive Lakers offense. And this is largely because of their ability to consistently draw double teams and generate open looks for their teammates. And yeah, it might require LeBron to shift his role a little bit. And maybe it means that AD doesn't get to be the primary scoring option, but the potential upside is enormous.
And I think the really interesting takeaway here is that this isn't a knock on Anthony Davis. It's not about saying that he's a bad player or that he doesn't belong on a championship team. It's more about the specific synergy, the way that different skills mesh together. And in this case, it's about the potential for Doncic to unlock a different level of offensive firepower for the Lakers.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a reminder that different combinations of players will always have different strengths and weaknesses. And the key is to find the combination that best fits the team's goals and their style of play.
Right. So now that we've explored all these different angles, it makes me wonder, where do we go from here? Like, given everything we've talked about, given this emphasis on perimeter creation, three-point shooting, how do we value players like Anthony Davis? How do we utilize them most effectively in the modern NBA? I mean, he's such a talented player, but maybe the way we think about big men, the way we use them, maybe that needs to evolve.
Yeah, that's a great question to leave everyone with. It's a question that teams all across the league are going to be grappling with for years to come. So thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.